Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to this session of Meezan lecture series. As you would all be knowing, this is a series in which we are studying Meezan, which is a book authored by Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi. It is his understanding of Islam, and we have been studying various chapters. Today, we will be, inshallah, concluding the chapter that we began a couple of weeks ago, which relates to the Penal Shari'ah. Of course, this is basically a chapter that relates to the punishments the crimes for which punishments have been prescribed by the Sharia. There are some details that always need to be refreshed in our minds whenever we start such sessions. First of all, the way the Quran has mentioned these punishments, it is clearly evident that these punishments will be administered by the state. No person has any authority to administer any of these punishments in any way. And as far as this authority is concerned, just as launching a war or jihad is the prerogative of a state, similarly, punishments can only be implemented by the state. No group, organization, or section of people has this authority or prerogative. So, this is something that has to be always kept in mind. It is the collectivity, and the collectivity manifests itself in the form of the leadership that is required to administer these punishments. And of course, these punishments, they are meant to protect the society in itself, and there are areas in which human behavior crosses the limits. So for some areas, these limits are they are rectified through education, through admonishing people, through trying to reform them. But then there are other areas in which some punishment, some sort of a penalty has to be imposed because of the nature of the crime, so that it does not happen again. And these punishments also act as deterrents. Also important here, ladies and gentlemen, is the fact that as far as these punishments are concerned, the Sharia has just legislated 5 crimes for which punishment has to be given. Other than these 5 crimes, all the rest have been left to the discretion of a parliament. And these 5 crimes, so for the first crime is muharaba, which means waging war against God and his messenger, which in other words means disrupting the collective system of the society, creating anarchy and disorder. So punishments have been prescribed for this. We studied them earlier on in our previous sessions. The second punishment for which, or the second crime for which punishment has been prescribed is the punishment of killing someone in lieu of murder. This is called qisas. So the second area, or the second crime for which a punishment has been prescribed is murder. And because this murder can be intentional as well as unintentional, so we have detailed ruling given by the Quran regarding both these types of murder. The third punishment relates to fornication, and of course this includes adultery as well. The Quran does not make any distinction regarding the punishment of adultery and fornication, as has been generally made by our jurists. We have described this earlier on, how misinterpreted, how these certain words of the Prophet and of course certain Quranic verses were misinterpreted, and people thought that the punishment of adultery and the punishment of fornication, adultery of course referring to people who are married and then they commit fornication, and fornication itself refers to the fact that unmarried people indulge in this act. So we studied that punishment as well. The fourth punishment that we studied, or inshallah we will study, is the punishment of qazf, which means that you accuse someone of fornication, and the fifth and last punishment will be that of theft. So all other areas in which any crime is committed is left to the discretion of parliament to legislate. Now, the third important thing here to realize is that the death punishment cannot be given to anyone except two sorts of crimes. So one of them is when someone has killed someone, and the second is when he or she is guilty of anarchy or spreading disorder in the country. So this is also something that has to be remembered. The fourth important thing that has to be remembered in this regard is that as far as these punishments are concerned, it is extremely important to understand that they are primarily prescribed for the believers, for the Muslims. All these punishments are they are prescribed for Muslims, and the reason that they are harsh is because they are given for a person not only for the crime because they have violated a certain code, but also that by committing these punishments, by indulging in these wrongful acts, they are also guilty of violating their covenant with God. So this is an added crime, and this makes those punishments harsh. The fifth and final important thing that has to be remembered in the background is that there are certain punishments which we have incorporated in the Islamic Penal Code, and they are punishments which do not exist, in fact, and they are unfounded. So one of them is the punishment of apostasy. This is a punishment which was given only in the times of Prophet Muhammad, because it was only his prerogative in his times, and not only in his times, but all previous messengers of God, that messengers who are sent to people of their own nation, they divulge the truth to the ultimate form, and if still there are people deny, then they are put to death. And there are people who might accept faith on the face of it for any other reason and then slip back into disbelief. So it is for such people that the punishment was of apostasy was prescribed. So therefore, this was given in the times of messengers of God only. Similarly, disbelief and polytheism is a punishment, is a crime for which only God will punish people. He did so in the times of his messengers, and then he'll again do so in the hereafter. But in the post-prophetic era, this has no basis at all. So with these couple of points in the background, let us now study the fourth punishment in this regard, which is the punishment of qazf. And this has been actually detailed out in the Quran in the following words. And of course, the word qazf, as you know, means to, or in the technical term, means to accuse someone of fornication. So the Quran not only mentions this, that some unrelated people accuse others of fornication, but it was also mentioned adjacent to these qazf verses when this whole process takes place between a husband and wife. So it has separately detailed out that as well. So I'm just going to read before you these verses. These are in fact verses 4 to 9, and they are found in Surah 24, which is Surah Nur. So the Quran says, وَالَّذِينَ يَرْمُونَ الْمُحْصَنَاتِ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَأْتُوا بِأَرْبَعَةِ شُهَدَاءَ فَاجْلِدُوهُمْ ثَمَانِينَ جَلْدَةً وَلَا تَقْبَلُوا لَهُمْ شَهَادَةً أَبَدًا وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ تَابُوا مِنْ بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ وَأَصْلَحُوا فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ وَالَّذِينَ يَرْمُونَ أَزْوَاجَهُمْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُمْ شُهَدَاءُ إِلَّا أَنفُسُهُمْ فشهادة أحدهم 4 شهادات بالله إنه لمن الصادقين والخامسة أن لعنة الله عليه إن كان من الكاذبين ويدرأ عنها العذاب أن تشهد 4 شهادات بالله إنه لمن الكاذبين والخامسة أن غضب الله عليها إن كان من الصادقين. So the translation would be, and those who accuse chaste women and bring not 4 witnesses as an evidence for their accusation, inflict 80 stripes upon them, and never accept their testimony in future. They indeed are transgressors, but those who repent and mend their ways, Allah is ever forgiving and most merciful. And those who accuse their wives, but have no witnesses except themselves, shall swear 4 times by Allah that they are telling the truth, and the 5th time that the curse of Allah be on them if they are lying. But this shall avert the punishment from the wife if she swears 4 times by Allah and says that this person is a liar, and the 5th time she says that the curse of Allah be on her if he is telling the truth. So this is the directive for qazf mentioned in the Quran, which of course, as I said, is implies accusing someone of fornication. And although in these verses only the accusation of women is mentioned by men, yet in the Arabic language we have this style which is called ala sabil al-taghlib, which means addressing the dominant element. This is adopted because normally in a society only women become targets of such allegations, and the society is also sensitive about them. So there is no doubt that on the basis of similarity of basis, or on these grounds, that because this is something that can occur with men also, the directive pertains to both men and women and cannot be restricted to women only. So in other words, if men are accused of fornication, the same verses or the same directive will apply. Now in these verses, as you can see, and as I just pointed out earlier also, that 2 forms of qazf, or accusing someone of fornication, are stated. So, firstly, a person accuses a chaste and righteous woman or man of fornication. And secondly, such an accusation takes place between a husband and a wife. In the first case, the law of Islam is that the accuser shall have to produce four witnesses. Anything less than this will not prove this accusation. Merely circumstantial evidence or mere medical examination in this case are absolutely of no importance. If a person is of lewd and loose character, such things have a very important role. But if he has a morally sound reputation, Islam wants that even if he or she has faltered, the crime should be concealed and the person should not be disgraced in the society. So in this case, it actually wants four eyewitnesses for the testimony to even initiate the hearing. And if the accuser fails to produce them, it regards that person to be guilty of qasf. So, according to the Quran, the details of the punishment of this qasf, as we have just studied in these set of verses, is that firstly, the criminal shall be administered 80 lashes. If he is unable to produce four eyewitnesses, he will be administered 80 lashes. Secondly, his testimony shall never be accepted in future in any matter, and as such, he shall stand disgraced and defamed in the society. Now, giving these 80 lashes or administering these 80 lashes and not considering a person eligible to bear witness are the punishments of the herein. Remember, these two punishments are basically meant for this world. Firstly, he will be given 80 lashes or he will be administered 80 lashes. And secondly, he will be rendered ineligible to bear witness in future. Now, as far as the hereafter is concerned, he shall be counted among the transgressors, except if he repents and mends his ways. In the second case, that is in the instance, if this instance of qasf takes place between a husband and wife, the Quran says that if there is no evidence available, the matter shall be decided by pledging oaths. And in technical terms, this is also called li'an, because the word li'an actually means to curse. And because these oaths are presented in a way that the final oath is a curse, then that is why precisely the word li'an has been used. The husband shall swear 4 times by God. I mean, if he is to accuse his wife of fornication and at the same time he has no other witness, I mean, no except himself, then he will swear 4 times by God that he is truthful in his accusation, and the 5th time he shall swear that the curse of God be on him if he is lying. The curse of God be on him if he is lying. In response, if the wife does not defend herself in any way, she shall be punished for fornication, for zina. But if she refutes the allegations, she shall only be acquitted from the punishment if she swears 4 times by God that the person is lying, and the 5th time she says that the wrath of God be on her if he is telling the truth. The same procedure shall be adopted if the wife accuses the husband. So, viewers, you can clearly see that this punishment is something which the Almighty has prescribed in a way that it actually wants to protect people who have stumbled, who are chaste, who are righteous, and who might have a one-off sort of a happening. They have encountered this happening in which they have committed this one odd instance of fornication. The Almighty wants to protect the reputation of that person, because once that person is brought in the notice of the law, then he will stand disgraced for the rest of his life or her life. So it wants that even if such a person has faltered, then his crime should be hidden and other ways and means should be adopted. And we know that as far as accusing someone of fornication in the presence of 4 witnesses is concerned, this is absolutely not an easy task at all. And the stringent nature of these witnesses actually tells us that the Almighty wants to hide such one-off incidents of fornication if they've taken place, and especially if the people who indulge in it are righteous and chaste human beings. So this is as far as the punishment of qazf is concerned. And as I said, it is divided into two. And the second qazf, or the second form of qazf, is also called li'an. Viewers, now let's come to the 5th and final punishment for which the Sharia has prescribed the fifth of crime for which the Sharia has prescribed a punishment, and this is the punishment of theft. And the Quran has mentioned it in detail in the fifth surah, or Surah Maida, and it goes like this. I'm just going to read out the text before you. والسارق والسارقة فاقطعوا أيديهما جزاء بما كسبا نكالا من الله والله عزيز حكيم فمن تاب من بعد ظلمه وأصلح فإن الله يتوب عليه إن الله غفور رحيم. And as to the thief, male or female, cut off their hands as a reward of their own deeds and as an exemplary punishment from God. For God is mighty and wise. But whoever repents and mends his ways after committing this crime shall be pardoned by God or by Allah. Indeed, Allah is forgiving and merciful. So clearly, viewers, you can see that the law that has been prescribed in these verses can be understood if we are able to break up these verses and understand them in their components. So the first thing that becomes evident is that the punishment of amputation of hands is prescribed for a thief, both male and female. So the Quran has used the word sariq and sariqa, which is a male thief and a female thief. So according to linguistic principles, the word sariq and sariqa are adjectives. They are adjectives, they are attributes, and therefore they denote thoroughness and completeness in the characteristics of the verb they qualify. So they can only be used for the type of sarqa, or the type of theft, which can actually be called a theft, and the person who commits it is called a thief. You know what this, in other words, means? That if a child steals a few rupees from his father's pocket, or a wife pinches some money from her husband's purse, or if someone steals something very ordinary, or maybe plucks some fruit from his neighbor's orchard, or carries away something valuable which has been left unattended or unprotected, drives away unattended grazing animals, or commits this ignoble offense owing to some need or compulsion, then no doubt all these are unworthy acts and they are classified as ignoble acts. But certainly they cannot be classified as acts of theft, which the above or the verses that I just shared with you, they qualify. This shows that the amputation of hands is the utmost punishment and should only be administered when the criminal does not deserve any lenience as far as the circumstances of his crime are concerned. To give you an example, in the times of Caliph Umar, there was a very, very severe drought, and he refused to amputate hands for people who would steal something, because he said that, well, these are extreme circumstances in which people need food, they need other essential items, and if this is something which cannot be supplied to them, especially items of food and victuals, then if they steal, they shall not be punished with this extreme form, because these are circumstances in which concession must be given, and the criminal who is doing it is not doing it for thrill or for any other purpose. He is doing it out of compulsion or need. So this is how we have to understand. People generally think that Umar had revoked this punishment in his own times, but they don't understand that this is not the case. He did not give it because, as we know, that this punishment can only be given when the punishment has, or the crime has taken place in its ultimate form, and the criminal deserves no lenience. And that is why, as I've just described, the word sariq or sariqa is used in the form of an adjective. Had it been a verb, an adjective actually denotes something that a person has become an embodiment of that act. But when that punishment or that act is expressed in the form of a verb, then that verb only means a couple of instances of a crime, or maybe a few instances. And the Quran has not used a verb. It has not said allazi saraq, allazi yasriq. It has said as-sariq, which, as I said, means a person who deserves no lenience if that crime is committed in its ultimate form. The second thing, as you can see, I'm just going to display the verse once again before you. It says jaza'am bima kasaba nakalam min Allah, which means as a reward of their own deeds. Now, this says that it is as an exemplary punishment from God. It says that as a reward of their own deeds and as an exemplary punishment from God. So in order to make the criminal an example in the eyes of others, just as the affinity between the crime and nature of its punishment requires that his hand be cut or amputated. It also requires that actually his right hand should be amputated, because it is in fact this hand which is the instrument of doing things. It is also evident that the word hand, on account of definite linguistic denotation, means the part of the arm which is below the wrist, and it cannot be anything else. So, all these implications and insinuations are found from within the words which are used by the Quran. Now, thirdly, what is evident from this set of verses is that the objective of this punishment is stated in the words "Jaza'an bima kasaba," that as a reward of their deeds and as an exemplary punishment. So, this is the objective of the punishment, that it means that the punishment, not only the consequence of the crime, that punishment is not only the consequence of the crime, it is also meant to make such criminals an example before others. Remember, the words are "Jaza'an bima kasaba nakalam min Allah." So, the word nakal in the Arabic language means something which is to be made an example. So people, after witnessing their punishments, come to know what God, who inflicts such torment in this world, will do with such defined people in the hereafter. So because of their greed for this world, people must not ruin their fate in the hereafter. So this is the purpose of this punishment. But in reality, if such punishments are implemented in a society, they become a means of discouraging crimes in it. It is a secondary benefit, and it also needs to be kept in mind. So now here, I will also cite before you a passage from Ustaz Amin Islahi's tafsir. This has been cited by Ustaz Javed Ghamidi in his book Meezan, and it is worthy of being studied. And in fact, I'll read it out before you because it shows how important this punishment of theft is and how it relates to a society. So he says, in this verse, two reasons are stated for the amputation of hands. Firstly, it is the punishment of the crime. And secondly, the punishment has to be given in an exemplary way, which is a means of a severe warning to others. The Quran uses the word nakal for such a punishment. Since both these reasons are stated adjacently without any conjunction between them, they must be regarded as essentials in carrying out the punishment. That is, a means of retribution of the crime, and as a means of severe warning for the society. Those who do not simultaneously take into consideration both these aspects often end up thinking that the punishment is severer than the crime itself. The actual fact is that this punishment is not only the retribution of the criminal act, but it is also a means to putting an end to many such crimes which may be triggered as a result of the criminals are not totally discouraged. If the criminals are not totally discouraged by treating them harshly. Like the craving for sex, the lust for wealth is also intense in a person. If this lust is allowed to thrive and prosper, the consequences which arise may well be observed in our own society by any keen eye. If a list of crimes committed in the most civilized of countries in 1 year only because of theft is prepared, it will be enough to open the eyes. The faint hearts of these civilized societies are deeply moved if hands are amputated because of theft. Yet, the horrendous crimes which result directly or indirectly through theft fail to rouse any feelings of concern in them. Theft is not a simple crime. It is a source of many crimes. If this crime is eliminated, these crimes shall automatically be taken off. Consequently, it is a matter of experience that the amputation of hands on account of theft has not only reduced instances of this crime, but has also gone a long way in reducing other crimes as well. If by amputating a few hands, the life, wealth, and honor of thousands of people are safeguarded, then this is not a bad deal at all. In fact, it is a very lucrative one. Regrettably, the intelligentsia of this modern age fails to appreciate this. So this is how basically it's explained that in order to understand the severity of this punishment, it's not just the punishment itself that must be taken into account. It is basically a second element also that has been added, and that is that this punishment acts as a deterrent because it makes an example of that person, and that example of a person actually makes that punishment even more severe, so that further instances of these crimes are not checked. So, viewers, with this, we come to an end to this chapter on penal Sharia, or the penal directives of Islam. And I would just, before we close our talk here, I would just like to recap and take a look very briefly at the punishments that we have previously studied in our previous weeks, so that we can have a bird's eye view of this whole penal Sharia. So, the first thing that we studied was the punishment of muharaba, which means to wage war against God and the Prophet, which actually means, in fact, it means to create a law and order situation, create anarchy and disorder. So I'm just going to read the text of that, of those verses in which this punishment has been mentioned. It says, "The punishments of those who wage war against Allah and His Prophet and strive to spread anarchy in the land are to execute them in an exemplary way, or to crucify them, or to amputate their hands and feet from opposite sides, or to banish them from the land. Such is their disgrace in this world, and in the hereafter theirs will be an awful doom, except those who repent before you overpower them. Then you should know that Allah is oft forgiving, ever merciful." So clearly, you can see that people who are guilty of such horrible crimes as rape and hijacking and molestation, they are the people who are being spoken of here. And about them, we see that there are there are four punishments which are prescribed. The extreme punishment of taqtil, which means to kill someone in a very severe way. The punishment of stoning is one example of this. Then we have tasleeb, which means to crucify people. Then we have amputation of hands, of limbs from the opposite sides. And finally, we have the fourth punishment, which is the least severe of all, and that is to banish someone or exile someone from his own country or land. And the Quran also says that if these criminals give up themselves before the law reaches them, then these punishments should not be administered, because this means that they have surrendered to the law, and not because they think that they'll be caught, but because they are really sorry for what they did. And if they surrender to the law as a result of that, then normal punishments of these crimes would be given, and not these severe punishments. This is what we studied as far as the first crime for which punishment has been legislated. The second is murder and injury, and again, this has been divided into two. And the first is intentional, and for that we have this verse of Qisas, in fact, two verses of Surah Baqarah, and I'm just going to read out the translation. It says, "Believers, decreed for you is the Qisas of those among you who are killed. If such a murderer is a free man, then this free man should be killed in his place, and if he's a slave, then this slave should be killed in his place. And if the murderer is a woman, then this woman should be killed in her place. Then whom for there has been some relief from his brother, you can accept this relief. However, after this, it is essential that this should be followed according to the ma'ruf, and there should be paid with kindness. This is a concession and a mercy from your Lord. After this, whoever exceeds the limits shall be in a torment afflictive. And there is life for you in qisas, or men of insight, that you may follow the limits set by Allah." So clearly, you can see that in this or these verses also, equality in qisas has been very emphatically prescribed. In the times of the Prophet, in the pagans, they would not just take revenge by killing the person who had killed. They would go far more ahead, and they would, at times they would ravage fields and land. They would kill animals, and they would kill 5 or 6 people in return for for the person who had been slain of their own tribe. So the Quran has first of all said that if this is a case, then you should not go beyond that, and the person who is guilty of the crime should only be punished. And then it has given this option that as far as criminals are concerned, if they are forgiven by the family, and from other instances of the Quran, we know that the state has also to concur with them, which means that it also agrees at the same time that this punishment is something that can be mitigated. And yes, if the family also agrees and the state also agree, then that forgiveness can take place, which means that the person who is guilty of murder can be acquitted. But then the Quran says that he must pay diyat, and diyat is basically a penalty, and the Quran says that this penalty is according to the norms of the society, and this could be of any amount, but that is something that has to be paid, and it should be done something. It should take place in a way that no remorse should be shown as far as criminals are concerned, who do not deserve any lenience. And even if a family forgives such a murderer and the government thinks or the state thinks that this is a person who has caused enough nuisance and he should not go scot-free, then he has to be killed in return as well. Next, we come to unintentional murder, which has also been prescribed by the Quran. At what exactly is the crime or a punishment of unintentional murder? This has been stated in verse 92 of Surah number 4, which is Surah Nisa. It says, "And it is unlawful for a believer to kill a believer except if it happens by accident. And he who kills a believer accidentally must free one Muslim slave and pay diyat to the heirs of the victim, except if they forgive him. If the victim is a Muslim belonging to a people at enmity with them, the freeing of a Muslim slave is enough. But if the victim belongs to an ally, there shall be given to his heirs, and a Muslim slave shall also have to be set free. He who does not have a slave must fast 2 consecutive months. This is from Allah, a way to repent from this sin, and He is wise, all-knowing." So you can see how the Quran has prescribed these statutes for unintentional murder. Just one thing that has to be understood, that slavery no longer exists in our society. So therefore, analogously, if a person is able to set free a person or maybe pay the bail of a person who might not have the money to get that bail, and at the same time also maybe discharge the debt of a person who might be under heavy debt and is also not being able to pay back his debt, then if this is also done, then analogously we can clearly see that this would also be sufficient. Uh, as far as the third punishment is concerned, that is of fornication, and I'm also now going to read out the translation of verses 2 and 3 of Surah Nur, which is the 24th Surah, in which the punishment of zina or fornication has been mentioned. So the words are, "The man and the woman guilty of fornication, flog each of them with 100 stripes, and let not compassion move you in their case in the enforcement of the law of God, if you truly believe in Allah and the last day. And let a party of the believers witness their punishment. The man guilty of fornication may only marry a woman similarly guilty or an idolatress, and the woman guilty of fornication may only marry such a man or an idolater. The believers are forbidden such marriages." Again, you can see, viewers, that as far as this punishment is concerned, as if this is something that is proven and the court has given its verdict, that person is guilty of fornication, then the Quran says that he shall never be able to marry amongst chaste people, or he should either marry amongst his own sort or her own sort, which of course are people who are guilty of adultery or fornication, or marry amongst idolaters, because this is something which has been forbidden to the believers. So in other words, there are two components of this punishment. One of them is 100 lashes, and the other one is that they will not be allowed to marry any chaste and righteous Muslim person. So viewers, this is a summary of what we have studied in the last few weeks. So the fourth and the fifth punishment is the one that we studied today, which is qazf, actually meaning falsely accusing someone or accusing someone of fornication and not being able to justify it by having the appropriate number of witnesses. And the fifth and final one was theft. So all in all, these are the 5 crimes for which punishment has been prescribed. Remember, these punishments are deterrents. Remember, these punishments are meant to protect a society from the outrageous behavior of certain people, and they have to be checked. Other than that, of course, the system in which you rehabilitate a criminal, or in other words, it's not just rehabilitation. If I may take a step ahead, it's basically incarcerating that criminal behind bars. This is the punishment which is not found in any way in the Penal Code of Islam. This is a much later addition to the Islamic Penal Code, and of course, this is something that is found in other countries as well. But Islam has not mentioned the jail punishment or incarceration in its system, because it is a punishment which is not just given to the criminal; it is actually given to his family as well, and therefore it has not made it a part of its own penal code. So I will now end my discussion and this whole chapter here. Inshallah, next week we'll be studying a new chapter. And now, if you have any questions regarding what we have just discussed and studied, please raise them.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Yes, Akram Bhatti, please unmute your mic and ask your question. Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Walaikum assalam.
Bismillah. Sir, I thought that Nafi is just like because they also he's deprived of the his family deprived of him when so uh, is that how is that
No,
not correct?
actually,
You put it
nafi or exile, it means that
yes.
you are deprived of your situation, of your environment, of the area in which you are living. So nafi doesn't mean that you are exiled alone. You are exiled with your family, so that basically you are not allowed to live in that place in which you have committed that crime. So basically, it's in a place where you violated the sanctity of that place. So in that case, as I said, you can exile that person. And because you've raised this question, I would also like to clarify here that in the time of the Prophet and the time of the rightly guided caliphate and much later as well, it was possible for people to, I mean, it was possible for the government to exile a person from one place to another if it was in the same country. But now, any international exile can only take place if the two governments agree. So, if in case such things are not available, for example, if a person is not, I mean, if a government is not being able to exile the criminal from one city or maybe from one country, then analogously, we can think of another thing which is very close to this, and that is house arresting a criminal. So, house arresting a criminal and not allowing him to freely move about in the space that he had lived all his life is something which is also very close. And as I said, if nafi or exile is not possible, which is the case in many countries, then house arrest is something which is I think would serve the same purpose as well.
So let me just for clarification for myself. You see, when they were exiled, people were exiled back then. They were exiled along with their family. Is that?
I mean, this is something. Yes, I mean, there is nothing against this in the Quran. I mean, whether they were or not, I'm not sure about it. But the words of the Quran do not in any way preclude the fact that this is something which is given specifically to the criminal. Basically, it is the nature of exile is not to punish his family. It is to punish that person from from remaining at the place where he was born, maybe, or where he grew up, so that it becomes a warning for him that the very place that you were lived in is the place in which you no longer deserve to live. So that is how it has to be viewed.
Okay, I thought it was to saving the society from this.
Yes,
From
yes,
this
it is. But at the same time, you see, at the same time, the family of the criminal is a group of people who would be exiled with him, of course, if they want to go. I mean, it was something that was offered to them. If they did not want to go, it was their sweet will. Otherwise, there was nothing that could stop them from this. So the basic purpose was not to deprive the criminal of his family, but it was to deprive him of the surroundings in which he spent all his life, because he has basically done something wrong to his motherland, to his homeland, or to his home city.
Thank you, sir. Jazakallah khair. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Rafia Khwaja, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Dr. Shehzad. So, Dr. Shehzad, my question is that as one is growing up, we have seen in young people, even older people, sometimes your emotions, you get carried away and you do commit a sin. And you ask God for forgiveness and you do tawbah sincerely. आप जो ये punishment कह रहे हैं, does it mean that God is not going to forgive you and this punishment is going to apply to you after your death for the rest of the time, you even after your death, as you said, you can't get married. I didn't follow it. You mean there's no forgiveness for this?
These are five different rules. As early we have discussed each of them. The matter of the hereafter rests with God, and of course your own repentance. And if you have done some harm to the other person, then his forgiveness would also be required. But this marriage is a punishment that person cannot marry amongst his own sort, which means amongst righteous people. So this is a punishment for people in this world. And the people who commit zina or adultery, for them, it's the dual punishment. At first, they will earn 100. I mean, they would have to, if or not. Of course, this would only mean that now, if they want to marry, they can only marry amongst people who are adulterers or fornicators. They cannot marry chaste men and women. This is part of the punishment. But this is only for this world. As for the next world is concerned, that would relate, of course, to the nature of the repentance and how God would accept that repentance. That is an entirely different affair.
But what happens to somebody who's married and makes a mistake? He's
So his
already
marriage would be
married.
annulled. I mean, that his marriage would be annulled with his wife. He can no longer live with his wife, because his wife is a chaste lady, presumably, and he would have to sever his ties from her, and either he remains single or he marries amongst idolaters. Or, I mean, the word idolater is basically meant to humiliate him and tell him, well, you have no place to go except you marry amongst such people. So basically, if he still wants to marry someone, then it can only be amongst other people who are declared fornicators by a court of law. Otherwise, he can stay the way he is. I mean, he can stay single, but he will not be connected to his previous wife. I mean, this will automatically annul his marriage also.
Thank you,
So
Dr. Shehzad.
in the world, there's no forgiveness. And
Please agree to
afterlife,
that.
it's
I
up
mean,
to
the
God.
forgiveness is, I mean, this is a punishment which will stay with that person. I mean, 80 lashes, of course, or 100 lashes will not be forgiven. They'll have to be administered. And secondly, I mean, he will have to remain married either amongst his own sort or not marry at all.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. I had a follow-up question on this. So, this punishment is only for someone who is proven to be guilty of this sin, and not
Of course,
someone
yes.
like
It's not
Rafia earlier
someone
said,
who's
for
not
someone who just got
absolutely
carried
right.
away.
Yes, absolutely right. If a person commits this punishment and it does not come into the notice of the law, and is not declared a public offender or a publicly person who has been given this punishment, then this will not apply. It will not apply to such people. It only applies to people who are convicted, who have come before the law has caught hold of them and administered punishment to them. It will only hold for them. But for people who have committed this crime and they are not, I mean, they have not been, they've not come before the eyes of the law, or they're hidden from the eyes of the law. And in fact, as I've just said earlier on, when we were discussing the punishment of qazf, that the intent of the Almighty in the Quran seems very evident, that it wants people who have faltered, especially righteous and just people who might have stumbled into fornication, that people should hide it. I mean, others should hide it if they come to know of it, and they themselves should also not present themselves before the law, because it's like a one-off thing. Because if they do so, then for the rest of their lives they will be condemned. So, and at the same time, the stringent witness system, which means that you see a person with 4 eyewitnesses, that is also something which is not easily obtainable. So, let me also remind you that in the times of the Prophet, this punishment was only given to those who came and confessed themselves that they were guilty of this, and that was the only way that we know of, that people confess, they insist that there be punishment. I mean, of course, being people who are righteous, at times it pushes them too far. That guilt drives them to go to the law, and they confess their crime. So in such a case, of course, if they confess their crime and it is proven, then they will be declared, I mean, publicly offenders, and only in that case will this apply.
Right. Thank you. So, there's a question in the chat. What is the punishment for homosexuality? Is it the same as for fornication? Some Islamic states have adopted rajam. What is your view on this?
There is no punishment which has been prescribed by the Sharia. I mean, the punishment has not been prescribed, but yes, an Islamic state can legislate in favor of a punishment. I mean, rajam or stoning to death is not a prescribed punishment at all. And I do not think that this crime deserves such a punishment. It is a crime in itself, and we can legislate some punishment. But as I said, this has not been prescribed by the Sharia.
So, whenever this topic comes up, like most of us just refer to the story of Prophet Lut. So, I mean, how does this?
So remember, for them, this punishment in which they were destroyed by tempestuous wind which had stones in them, it relates not to this act of sodomy. It actually relates to the fact that they had denied a messenger of God, and they had indulged in polytheism. So basically, it was the punishment of polytheism that was given to it. The fact that they indulged in this act of sodomy was an additional thing. To make things more clear, you can just think about the fate of the nation of Shuaib. So remember, they were people who did not weigh and measure correctly. So it would not be right to say that they were punished because of not weighing and measuring correctly. This was an added crime that they did, but their punishment actually took place because of their own polytheism. Similarly, the people of Lot were destroyed not because of sodomy. That was an additional thing. They were basically punished for denying the truth that had come to them and for deliberately indulging in polytheism.
So, does that mean that the crime, the act of homosexuality as um is not as bad as fornication is, or is it
You see,
like?
as far as is concerned, it is equally bad, because you see, it actually disrupts the family system. But you see, the reason that perhaps the Almighty in the Quran have not legislated in this regard is that it does not want this crime to be checked in this way all the time. So it could be through education, through rehabilitation, through other means in which this thing should be inculcated. So, and that is precisely why the Sharia. Otherwise, you see, we would have found punishment prescribed for it in the Sharia. We don't have any such punishment. There's no hadith of the Quran which says so. So this means that we have the discretion either to legislate or not. And the reason that we have this discretion is that many a time such things can be reformed through instruction, through education, through other means, and only when it becomes something of a nuisance that we should legislate. But yes, we can legislate.
Thank you. So there's another question in the chat. Is the system of jailing people against the Quranic injunctions?
I would say so. Otherwise, the Quran would have adopted this punishment. You see, we know that in this particular form of punishment, it's not just the person who's punished, it is his family who's punished as well. If he's not married, then his parents are punished. If he is married and has children, then his wife and his children are punished. So they live in agony. So that is why what has happened is that the Quran has either prescribed a penalty in the form of lashes, or even the death punishment, or it has given punishments in which the criminal is actually made to suffer, not the family.
Right. There's another question. Why do Middle Eastern Islamic countries persecute the journalists who speak the truth and raise voice against the rulers? Usually they are exiled, and does this punishment given to the journalist on the basis of fasad fil ars?
I mean, this is very unfortunate, and if you need to ask them that why do they do it? But we, of course, certainly would not agree with them. I mean, punishing someone for doing his job or her job, yeah, of course, something which is in itself a form of persecution. Yes, there has to be a code of conduct. If the person violates that code of conduct, he could be punished for a certain way, but not in the way that we generally find find them to take place. So persecuting such people or not allowing them to live with the ideology that they would like to live with and for is something that the Quran says, al fitnatu ashaddu min al qatl. It says persecution is worse than murder. So people must always keep this in mind, that this persecution is not an ordinary crime. It's worse than murder according to the Quran.
Thank you. Bisma, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Assalamualaikum, Dr. Saleem. So my
Right, so
question is that as far as homosexuality is concerned, if God has not given a direct punishment for it in the Quran, are we to assume that it's because it actually is something that God knew that humans would indulge in, but He wanted them to follow the natural course, and that's why He did not put it out there as
I
a
mean,
form
you
of
see,
capital punishment?
it's always difficult to think what God was thinking. But what we
Uh,
can what we can gather is that there are areas in which God wants the punishment to be prescribed when there are instances in which this is something which becomes very common. Maybe it becomes part of the society. So yes, this homosexuality has existed ever since time immemorial, but the extent of it, which is found in the society, is, I think, it's not that much as the Quran would have wanted, so that it prescribe a punishment. So you see, the basis for prescribing a punishment are two, and that is that either you commit something, some felony which is against the life, wealth, and honor of people, or you do something which is against the norms of protection which are given by the state. So if that is the
Okay.
case, then you can legislate. So that is why I think the Quran has left it to our discretion. Otherwise, it would have easily done so.
Okay. Okay.
Right.
Thank you so much.
So there's another question. What is the punishment for misuse of power and corruption?
Well, this is a very wide, question, a very vast question. I mean, it depends what the nature of that corruption is. If it is theft, if it is bungling, it is embezzlement. Of course, there are laws which are enacted, various penalties are imposed, but the Sharia is not prescribed. It has left this sort of criminal behavior for a parliament to decide that they can rule a certain amount of punishment or penalty. It has not given. Remember, the temperament of the Sharia is that it only interferes and gives punishments of a very, very small number of things, because it knows that for the rest of the things, our own intellect is sufficient to find our way. It is only when when Almighty thinks that there are instances in which we might falter or we might not find the right way, does it interfere. So you see, there are just 5 crimes for which punishment has been prescribed. Just 5 crimes. We just studied them in the past few weeks. For the rest, it has left, they are left to our discretion to see and behave the way we would like to. So embezzlement, corruption, all these are things in which a state can legislate, the parliament can legislate, and it would be different for different societies, for different countries, and that is the beauty of it as well.
Rafia Khwaja, please ask your questions. Please keep it short, though.
Dr. Shehzad, what I understand is that even the punishment for prostitution, fasad fil ard, when it happens, then you punish the men and women because the prostitution is being encouraged and the men and women are getting involved in it. So they are creating a society where there is fasad fil ard. Did I understand correctly that this is why then God has issued these punishment to be done publicly so that people learn that this is corruption in the society? Am I correct in this?
So as far as 2 of the punishments are concerned, they are to be given in a way that it becomes public knowledge. One of them is the punishment of fornication, because for that the Quran has said that the fornicator, he must be flogged in public. And there should be a group of people who should witness what's going on with him, so that it becomes a deterrent in the society. And the second is that of theft, because once a person's hand is cut, especially the right hand, it immediately gives this signal that he's a thief. And for that, you don't need to witness that amputation, because when the person is going to move around in the society, he is going to give this signal that he is a corrupt person whose hand was amputated because of this crime. For the other 2 crimes, or the other 3 crimes, publicly administering them has not been prescribed.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. There's another question in the chat which is not related to the topic today. So may I take it?
So yes, if we don't have any further questions on the topic, we can take that question.
Right. So कुरान मजीद की आखिरी सूरा में इंसानों और जन्नात के शर से पनाह मांगने की तलकीन की गई है, जो दिलों में वसवसा डालते हैं. जन्नात किस तरह से इंसानों के दिलों में वसवसा डालते हैं, और हमें कैसे पता चलेगा कि ये वसवसा जन्नात की तरफ से ही डाला गया है?
We will never come to know about that, because this is a news, a piece of news which God has given them, given us, and the mechanism of this whispering, so to speak, has not been divulged before us. All that we know is that both men and the jinn, they do that. How they do that, we just cannot be sure of. As far as for human beings are concerned, well, that could be overt and that could be covert. So they could be doing something in which They could be suggesting something to us in an indirect way, and directly that is something that we all experience. But as far as the jinn kind or jinn folk are concerned, we have absolutely no sure or certain knowledge how to do it. But we have been just informed by the Quran that this is something that they do.
Right, thank you. Bisma, you may ask your question now.
So, Dr. Saleem, Islam has no concept of uh, saints the way Christianity does, right? The patron saints, or like, are angels supposed to be the patron saints, the intermediaries, or people who not people, beings that Allah sends down to help us? Is there a concept there,
I
or
mean,
there's no concept? It's just
it
God in
it
us.
depends. I mean, we don't call them saints at all because you see, as for a person to be declared a saint, and for example, in Catholicism,
Uh-huh.
he has to be shown that he has worked three miracles. For example, a
Right.
person who and there are the different standards. But as far as Islam is concerned, it has just two categories: that people are either messengers or envoys of God, or they are not, and there's no other stage. And amongst people who are envoys of God and amongst people who are ordinary human beings, the Quran says that there are two categories of righteous people. One is the Sabiqun, which means that they are foremost and they'll be at the topmost level of paradise. And the second one are called Ashabul Yameen, which means the people of the right hand or the companions of the right hand, and they will be the second in category or in status to the Sabiqun. That is the only category which the Quran tells us. So it tells us that we should strive to become the Sabiqun, and it also tells us in Surah Waqia that there would be a large bunch of people near the time of the Prophet who would be able to reach this coveted position, but very few people would be able to reach this coveted position amongst the later generations, because this would require much more effort, sacrifice, piety, and righteousness. Other than that, we don't find any other categorization in the Quran.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right, so there's one more hand, and this is the last question we're going to take. Riaz Khan, please unmute your mic and ask your question. Keep it short.
Walaikum assalam.
Just two very small questions. One is um, according to the folks who quote the hadith, one is that the 10th Dhul Hajj is the biggest day of the year. And the other thing is, once you perform your Hajj, all your sins are just forgiven. Now, the biggest day of the Hajj, that means of the year, that means what about the Ramadan days? And are they bigger? Are this bigger?
I mean, there is no
So,
such hadith to my knowledge which says that the 10th of Dhul Hajj is the best of days, or it is the greatest of all days. I don't recall any such narrative.
okay.
Have you read any such narrative?
It's been quoted in the Jummah, khutbahs, and I just don't
I
understand.
haven't seen any narrative of the Prophet say so. And as you rightly said, I mean, the Quran does not compare these things. I mean, the 10th of Dhul Hajj has its own importance. The month of Ramadan has its own importance. Amongst days, Friday has its own importance. So each of these have their own importance, and it would be like comparing whether the three mosques which have been commemorated by the Almighty, like the Temple of Solomon, the Baitullah, and the Prophet's Mosque in Medina. We cannot start comparing them because they
Okay.
have their own importance. So, in a similar way, these days and months, they are like bonus given to us so that we are able to secure more blessings of God. And each of them have their own blessings and their own importance. I don't think we should do. I mean, if you should indulge in comparison.
Okay.
Thank you,
This is
Dr. Shehzad.
the
The second question,
second
yeah.
was the Hajj. When you perform the Hajj, you're back. All your sins
Yes.
are.
So that actually
And
only means that if you are able to offer your Hajj in a way that you sincerely repent from all your previous minor sins. Remember, the sins that are being spoken of here are minor sins. For example, adultery or theft or other, or maybe bungling, or maybe not misappropriating the shares of inheritance, because these are the major crimes which have been mentioned in the Quran. So only minor sins, not the major ones, are referred to here in this hadith, and only those sins which can be revoked or deleted because of sincere repentance. So this is how you have to understand the hadith. It does not give you a blanket forgiveness for everything. It only gives you that part of forgiveness in which the minor sins, and though that too, I mean, these sins have to relate to you and your God. They should not relate to anyone else, because if you have deceived someone or done a bad deed to that person, that's not going to be forgiven in any case. So this hadith is actually referring to a very specific category of sins, minor sins, and also amongst those minor sins, the ones which relate to you and your God.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad, for giving the detailed answer of all the questions everyone had. And thank you, everyone, for participating. We will be concluding our session here and see you all tomorrow. Have a great rest of the day. Allah